Hello, my name is Samuel Calvin Still III. I am the chairman at the Dr. James Still Historic Office site in Medford, New Jersey. I am the second great grandnephew of Dr. James Still.
And my name is Marc Lorenc. I am a PhD in anthropology, and I was the project director for the Dr. James Still Community Archaeology Project. And we're very happy to be here. And today we're going to talk about a little bit of the community engagement that we've been trying to do as an education center. And Sam's going to start off with a little bit of an overview of who Dr. Still is. And then we're going to jump into a little bit of an overview of the efforts that we have been doing as an education center and a committee. And then I'll jump into a little bit of the archaeology project, and then we'll outline some of our future initiatives. So I'm going to hand this off to Sam. And you just let me know when you want me to switch the PowerPoint forward, Sam.
All right, Dr. James Still was born in 1812 and died in 1882. He only received 3 months of formal education. His practice was an herbal medicine practice. He distilled his own medicines and extract from roots and herbs. He studied books on anatomy, physiology, and botany and biology, I believe it was. And I can't see the full screen there, Bob. So it's okay. He was born of two. You can just go to the next slide. His mother and father were both former slaves. His father was able to buy his freedom in 1798, and his mother, they lived in Caroline County, Maryland. And in 1804, 1805, she decided to try to escape. She reunited with her husband in what we called Greenwich, New Jersey, and she was captured. She came along with 4 children, and she was captured. She went back to the plantation in Caroline County. It was a Griffin plantation. A few months or to a year later, she decided to run away again, and she left 2 of her boys left in slavery, figuring they had a better chance to survive slavery than the girls did. So she reunited with her husband around 1805, and they traveled up through what we figure was Swedesboro into Eastham, and then finally settling out to Chemung. Levin's last name was actually Steele, and it's in his manumission papers. But when he got to New Jersey, he met other people that were last name were Still. He adopted the last name Still, changed his name from Steele to Still, and his wife Sydney changed her name from Sydney to Charity. They moved out to Chemung or Indian Mills in order to hide the fact that she was still a fugitive. He was very cautious about people around them. They kept it very hidden, very secret among the family. No one really ever spoke about it. And so they moved out there to stay safe. Dr. Still was, I believe, was number 9 of the children. And like I said, he was born in 1812 and in 1882. You can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, it looks like he was number 9 or number 10 on the list. And he was in the middle of the pack. That's what I like to say. And go to the next slide. What you see in the one image there to the top is Dr. Still's office to the far left. That is still standing, and that's what we're trying to work on stabilizing right now, his office. The building structure to the right was his home. It was a 3-story Victorian style home. It collapsed like in 1932. After he died, his daughters lived in the house, and she was kind of a recluse. And it looks like she had a mortgage of about $900 and never paid on it. So the house went up for sheriff's sale, and that's how the family lost it. It came out of the family's hand. We know that during Dr. Still's time that it was known that he had a treatment for skin cancer. He treated races of all people. By the age of 70, he was the 3rd largest landowner in Medford, New Jersey. The picture to your far right is actually the tenement house, the hospital that he purchased, which was around the corner from his home. He purchased that and turned it into a hospital. Next slide. In 1870, he documented the first Still family reunion. So this year marks the 150th anniversary of our first family reunion. He took a naturalistic approach to curing ailments. He was known to have a treatment for scrofolio, which was a type of tuberculosis. There's an infection with the lymph nodes. He was well known for this salve that they called it was a heel ointment, but it was called the bulldog salve. And it was a bunch of pine tar and some other stuff. We don't have the recipe, but it was sold in different pharmacies around New Jersey, which I found out here recently, a few years ago. What I always found was interesting with Dr. Still's book was his advice to young people. Stay out of the drinking houses, buy property, save your money, and you'll be able to help somebody along the way. Give all your everything, give God, his honor, and do things with praying to God and finding what he would want you to do. So he definitely believed in providence, and his way he kind of guided his life. The picture you see to the left, if you go back, that is the book that Stockton State University republished. It's called The Early Recollections and Life of Dr. James Still. He wrote that in 1877, and we have that here for sale. Next slide. Just a couple slides just a couple pictures I pulled together. When I was doing some research on this, I realized I had learned about Bright's disease. I had heard about scrofolio, and I was like, wow, I must become a genealogist. So I threw that in there because I had never heard of any of those things until I started studying about Dr. Still. He used stuff like Queen Anne's lace. There was sassafras, there's tea berry, Virginia snake root, skunk cabbage. He used those type of things to distill some of his medicines. Next slide. What also was really interesting about Dr. Still's book is what he said and some of his quotes. This is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Still, and it says, "A great mind is planted within us in the beginning of our lives, and like other plants, it needs cultivation and watering from the best fountains." Some of the things that Dr. Still and his brother William Still talked about, we still tell our children today. So it's amazing how some of that wisdom is still being I don't want to say reinvented, but still being told today. Was always been quite interesting when I read his book and go through things. And every time I turn around, either Paul or even Marc Lorenc finds a quote that I haven't read, I haven't pulled out of the book, and I'm just always amazed by some of the things. We know that one of his sons became the third African-American man to graduate from Harvard Medical School. That was Dr. James T. Still Jr. And he lived in Boston, Massachusetts, and he had quite a business. And I think he died at the age of 59 from kidney disease. But Dr. Still had a niece who was a daughter of William Still. She was encouraged to become a doctor in the city of Philadelphia. So she was the first African-American female to get a licensed physician in the city of Philadelphia. And that was really because she was inspired by her uncle and inspired by her cousin, James Jr. I think that's the last of my slides. This is
I think it would be useful to share, like, how you got involved in the Still story, and obviously you're a Still, right? So tell us a little bit about your journey of like doing the history, and it's a huge part of the center. So
I've been telling this story since I was 13 years old, to be quite honest. My mother talked me into talking to a school over in Palmyra, New Jersey, and I've been reading and kind of studying the family history for a very long time. But probably till I got into my late 30s and early 40s when I really started digging and doing some hardcore research, trying to find out some different things that didn't add up when I was younger. 2006, the state brought the property. We got some people. We had some cousins involved. They noticed that the property was going for sale. They got DEP involved, and DEP turned around and was able to purchase the property and purchase the property next to it, which we call it the Dr. James Still Education Center, where I'm at today. So in 2013, we came under the Medford Historical Society, and we worked under their auspice until 2019, until 2020 this year. We used to run about 300 to 400 kids a year through a educational program. We host organizations to come through. Right now we're doing visits by appointment, and we try to keep it down under 10 to 15 people at the most. We do a yearly day of service. We do a thing called Talking Across the Gap, where we came together and we sat around and talked about what things were current and how we could better things in our community. We've also done some Juneteenth celebrations. The jazz concert we had here, we had the first Pinelands jazz concert here. We've done some holiday tea parties. We had a black tie fundraiser. This year, because of COVID-19, we actually did a webinar. We had people give presentations on herbal remedies. We had Don Tate, who just came out with a publisher of the William Still Freedom Stories. It just came out. It's a children's book. It's a really great job he did. The gentleman's name was Don Tate. He reached out to me last year sometime, and I helped him out with some historical facts on the family, which went really well for him. He had been digging, did some really good research, and I thought it was a good project, and got along with it. It was been a good deal. We do the Lines of the Pines down in Stockton University. And we try to go out and do community events, and I give presentations and those kind of things. But our main focus has always been to restore and preserve the legacy of Dr. Still. We kept this site in the forefront of the parks and forestry, and that's the reason why now we have the stabilization project going on that's restoring or stabilizing Dr. Still's office, which has been something that we've been trying to do for a number of years and trying to get the funding to do it. It's phase one. We still got a long way to go, but this is a big start. We also have a nature trail. We have a total of 18 acres out here, and we have a 1 mile nature trail, and we just keep it open to the public to come out and walk and enjoy the grounds. And we're doing some new things. We got a wildflower garden out there that we planted this year, and it's just kind of taken off, and it's just beautiful. We have benches out there, and people just go out there and just kind of chill out and maybe sometimes meditate and just relax and enjoy nature.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of our big initiatives is, there's a tendency for historical houses and education centers to be, frankly, quite boring. And we don't want to be like that. We want to be useful for the community near us. We want people to come to us for events and engagement, and not just, feel like they come into the education center and they can't touch anything, they can't ask questions, and they feel like it's a very suffocating space. We want to do the opposite of that. So a lot of these initiatives you see here are for engaging the community and also just providing resources that sometimes these communities don't have. Sam didn't mention so many things also, right? Because there's
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I'm not saying that you missed anything, but you guys do so much there. Bringing in school kids from Camden, you got so much
school kids. We bring in different organizations. We have an herb garden. So when kids come, we take them out to the herb garden, let them smell what thyme, let them smell what lavender smells like. Today I had 3 doctors come by. They were very interested. One was an OBGYN in the area. She had heard about Dr. Still, and she just was very enthusiastic about hearing about his life story and actually talking to somebody from the family. Very interested about his approach to medicine and how he healed people and that type of thing, and to realize that he only had 3 months of formal education. What we're trying to do, hopefully in the near future, we want to make this place more of almost like a holistic center, so that people can come and learn about herbal remedies, can learn about, we want to be able to maybe teach a Tai Chi class, have some yoga out here, teach people about how to be healthy. And for me, as being African American, it's always been interesting as I learn more about trying to be healthy, vegetarian. Like I'm still struggling with that. I tried it for 3 months this year and I get it. It was great for me. And I'm working towards back to doing that on a regular. But we want to create a community place where people can come, enjoy nature, learn about being healthy, learn about, aromatherapy and other things like that to keep themselves healthy. And that's what we're hoping in the near future. Right now on the team, we have an herbalist. She's been doing it for a number of years. She's actually an autistic school teacher, but her big thing that she wants to do is really do more herbal medicine. She's got that going on. We've got a woman who wants to come and teach Tai Chi and do those things. So we're trying to go into that focus. So if there's people out there that are interested in doing those things, stop by, reach out to us, because we're really trying to create like an entrepreneur type center with a holistic type viewpoint and focus on those things so that people can feel better about getting healthy. Because I think sometimes it's a real struggle. Some people think when you go get healthy, you got to almost be kind of a hippie, and I don't think that's the case. I think you can be healthy and learn about it and not be so intimidated by maybe trying to be a vegetarian and learning how to, do a vegetarian dish. We're looking to do some canning classes this fall, apple butter. The herbalists we're planning in next month. Or no, I'm sorry, at the end of this month, we're going to do, I think it's October 24th. We decided yesterday that we're going to do a class on fire cider. So we're going to do that as a live stream like this is right here. So we're going to do something on fire cider, and that's going to help with your immunity systems. So it's it's like a natural immunity cocktail per se, if you want to call it that, to really boost your immunity. So those type of things that we're trying to give out to the public and let them feel that they can learn how to be healthy, and it's okay to be healthy and to eat proper and to go out and exercise and learn about meditation and those kind of things. So it's great for me because I haven't, I'm learning now, so I'm all in trying to figure this stuff out. So that's the things that we're trying to work on in the near future.
Yeah, and there's always new ideas, and like Sam mentioned, we're a volunteer-based organization, so everything is dependent on the volunteer labor and who's willing to help out, and we're surviving on grants and donations and things like that. So any help would be appreciated. And I'm going to jump into my project in the interest of time, just so we can get questions and stuff going. But I joined this committee in 2013, way back when, but it took a lot of years of just developing relationships with the different committee members before I ever started digging. I think that's a huge important part in community engagement, is that you have a long-term presence and that you don't just go there and then disappear and never be heard from again, which tends to be something that happens in archaeology sometimes, where you have folks who do research and you never get to see that data, and they kind of just hold off that data and they don't share it with the public. I wanted to invert that hierarchy, and I got really into community-based participatory research as a method. A lot of this was trying to see how archaeology can be more than just digging. How can we use it as a place where people can come together, where they can meet other people that they don't typically get to see on a day-to-day basis, but also introduce them to archaeology, introduce them to historical research, introduce them to preservation and stewardship and all these concepts, and start building these skills and these knowledge so that they can take that back to their communities, or they can help volunteer at this center. A lot of what I wanted to do is really educational. It's performative. It's also very much collaborative. And the way I did that is you have to kind of structure your field schools and your archaeology differently, right? Ours was free and open to the public. I was there from Tuesdays to Saturday, or Monday through Saturday, every day during the week. And, folks can't necessarily dedicate that time, especially during the summer months. I had a lot of teachers who were able to do it. We had folks who are retired. But then there's also people who, took days off. There's folks who flew in from Florida, took their vacation and dug. It's super important to recognize that there's an economic barrier when it comes to archaeology. And if you want to engage the public, you have to knock that down. We were lucky enough to do that because we got a grant through the New Jersey Historical Commission, which allowed us to buy all the equipment that was necessary. And I donated my time as a researcher to be able to carry out this field school. And then, as I mentioned, community-based participatory research, I'm going to refer to that as CBPR for the rest of this presentation. That's a whole framing of what a partnership looks like. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide, specifically when I look at critical race theory. You put those two together and it forces you to interact with organizations. It forces you to interact with people differently. And this was really the goal, right? Like I mentioned, this is supposed to be a critical pedagogy. It's supposed to be capacity building, having folks think about history, archaeology in a different manner. And the most important part I felt was to create the sense of community at the historic center, office site and the education center. And this was done by working closely with folks and making sure that their voices, their thoughts and input were included in the project design. So what my framework really works off of is I'm pulling from other folks' previous research, right? My advisor was Whitney Battle Baptiste at UMass Amherst, and one of my committee members was Sonia Adelaide. These two books from the archaeological perspective were super foundational on how to run a different type of community archaeology. I started taking critical race theory courses also, which at the time wasn't so politicized as it is today. But that theory really opened up different perspectives and understanding people's different experiences and keeping open an empathetic ear to understanding that maybe as a white guy, I don't understand what someone like Sam might be going through on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's okay. All I have to do is listen and give them the space to tell that story. So when you look at these components and you try to bring them together, you realize that a lot of it is just recognizing that you don't have all the answers, and that's fine. You can get those answers by building community, by bringing people together, by making sure that you as a researcher dedicate your expertise in certain areas, but you don't necessarily shut out other people's experiences or perspectives or knowledge. You bring that into the fold and you create what's called a rated knowledge, where you have different perspectives strengthening each other, rather than someone shutting something down or being like, no, I have the doctorate, you don't, so you don't know what you're talking about. Like that's the exact opposite of what I would want to see at the site. And then recognizing that, folks are coming from different backgrounds, different levels of privilege, different levels of experience and exposure, and that's okay too. You bring people in that way and have them experience difference. And when you put these two together, you get what Martin Luther King Jr. talks about when he talks about beloved community. This is folks who know that there is difference in society, but you can get over that by actually listening to each other and collaborating. And this matches, you have to match this with local value systems, right? Like all of this would fall on deaf ears if you're not talking to the groups and talking through the language that they're familiar with. So, we're in Medford. It's predominantly white, but it's also predominantly Quaker community. There's a lot of cross hatching here with the values that Quakers hold, which they call spices, and some of the stuff they saw on the previous slide when it comes to the types of work that CBPR and CRT can engage with. So this is not supposed to be like a one-stop method. I urge folks who want to do something similar to really look at the context that they're working in and then try to make this method work for that context. And that's the best way you can make your project speak to people in the community. And the same thing with the education center, right? Like all our initiatives are trying to speak to what would make sense for the local communities nearby. All the initiatives that Sam's mentioning make sense for, where we see gaps in the community and what we want to bring to the communities. This holistic healthcare message that Sam was sharing. So I want to just stress in the remaining time, I'm not going to go too much into the actual archaeology itself, but we'll give a brief overview of it. And if there's questions in the Q&A, I'll love to answer them. But just when you frame an archaeology site like this, you start creating a different space at the site. As you can see, there's a lot of folks working together, probably more so than you would typically put on a test unit. Generally, these are 1 by 1 meter units. I kept them that way just to make sure that we had control over the excavation, and we're able to keep consistency. A lot of these folks were inexperienced, so I was bouncing around in between the test units, but also working with, I would train a couple of folks to be sort of like my crew chiefs to help out. Some folks came with archaeology experience and they were able to help out in the units a little bit more than some other volunteers. The key for this project is to make sure that, you're talking with people, explaining everything that you're doing, why you're doing it, showing them how to document it. And then that way it could always be reproduced. If there's a mistake, they're following the same sort of methodology that we set out. I call this groundings with communities, and this is based off an idea by Walter Rodney, who was a famous African-American philosopher, social theorist. And his whole thing was like, in order to understand the community, you got to go to the community, talk with them, be in their environment, and that's how you understand it. What we saw at this site, we had 150 plus volunteers come and take part in this. We had folks from companies using this as their volunteer day. We had folks who wanted to just show their grandkids what hands-on history looks like. You had educators. You had folks who just wanted to drop by because, we're on a busy road. This project drew so much attention. Folks would just pull over and just ask questions and see what is the Dr. Still story. They always saw this office. They didn't know there was anything going on. So it was also like a beacon for the center in some ways, and it increased volunteering and things like that. When I say grounding, like I mentioned, it's this theory of Walter Rodney's, but it's also the idea of like what archaeology is actually doing. You're producing knowledge through excavating. You're grounding reality, you're grounding history in some sort of material expression, right? So when you do an excavation, I always treated it as a metaphor and the actual craft of archaeology. Archaeology as a metaphor, meaning that it's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of coming to understand how historical narratives are shaped and created, and how those narratives ultimately become what we end up reading on a plaque. And who makes those decisions? Who tells the stories? What ways are they formulated? I ultimately wanted to instill that, and that was part of that capacity building to the community. And what we ended up getting a lot of was when we did a lot of interviews with volunteers afterwards, people would comment on how there's like this sense of community at the dig, and that, coming to the site was something that folks would look forward to. Even though they're volunteering in like 90+ degree weather in July, Sam's gonna tell stories about how the canopies weren't there the first couple of weeks. But when they were, it was obviously better for everyone. But this is like a place where, archaeology was grounding the Dr. Still story. It was making their engagement with the site more tangible. And it proves something that we already knew, right? That Dr. Still was always here, that he had this house, that all of this stories that he writes about in his autobiography were real. And for sure, like we knew this, but the actual act of excavating and then being able to see the foundation of his house, being able to pull out artifacts that are from the time period, this was like a game changer for a lot of folks, right? That's Dr. Tim Horsley. He came out, helped us do some ground penetrating radar. Awesome guy. We came out with, basically we did the radar in the area that you see highlighted in red. We were looking for, the footprint of the Victorian house. We already knew where it was located due to historical photos. But we knew, there were some changes in between the time that the house fell down in 1932 to 2020, right? So we had this ground penetrating radar map. And our concentration, the way this worked was we did this project. Tim came to the center, presented to the community on preliminary data. He taught them about the actual process of doing GPR, how to do soil resistivity readings. So once again, it's this capacity building of showing folks how geophysical surveys work. we did that, and then once we got the full data set, I did an additional event where we looked at the data, and then as you know, a couple of volunteers and members of the community were there. I asked, what is the target that we want to go after? What are we really looking for? And a lot of what it was the Victorian house. So we went after some of the features there. Some of the stuff you see here, like the giant green rectangle and that circle on the bottom of the house that has a bunch of test units on it, those are modern septic features. The large green rectangle was a runoff, and the bottom one was just the septic system, which, is disappointing, but what are you going to do? Ground testing the geophysical stuff. What we did find, though, was the house foundation. And in there, we found a lot of awesome artifacts, right? We found a parlor table, a coal bucket and shovel. We found the parlor stove. Paul Shop, who's attending this meeting right now, actually was awesome enough to find the patent for us, and we were able to identify it quickly. Matches up to the date of the construction of the house. So awesome stuff there. We found the kitchen cistern. This was an addition of the original house that still had on the property that was moved to the rear of the Victorian house. Ton of garbage refuse from the 1940s and above. We had to dig through that just to get to the lower level. And then we ultimately got to the buried horizon of the still site. For the ceramic assemblage, this is still a work in progress. A lot of the artifacts, actually all the artifacts from our excavations are still at UMass Amherst at the library there, while we're waiting for the education center to be up to par for hosting all these artifacts. The ultimate goal is to have everything at the center and in the restored office. What we see is that Still's assemblage was pretty utilitarian for his means. We do have his probate records, which, compared to other doctors of the period, were very similar. He was really big in managing his perception. As you can imagine, someone who is being racialized at that time period for being a Black doctor, not taken seriously because he doesn't have the licensure of the other physicians, because he wasn't allowed to because of his color of his skin. He wasn't given that access. He had to be almost overly descriptive about how he's spending his money, what he's spending his money for, what he'd do with all of his investments and things like that. So he's really portraying a sense of self, right? And in his autobiography, he talks about this, how he's constantly trying to portray the sense of self as someone who, as a self-made man, is constantly against this battle of being stereotyped. So what we see here, and I try to reframe it as, rather than looking at it as status markers, like we should take a look at this as his engagement with that idea of meritocracy, with that idea of the self-made man. Really try to grapple with the notion of how race and the broader politics of medicine at that time period tie into notions of respectability, opportunity, uplift, prudence, providence. These are all things that archaeology can do, right? When you frame your perception and excavations in a certain manner, and you understand what you're looking at from a contemporary perspective, rather than just trying to recreate the past, it allows you to really get into why the stories resonate with people today, what brings them to the site, what are they getting out of these types of stories. I call this, working off of something that Sam once said to me, is just breaking bread. You bring people together, you talked about these issues, and when you get folks talking, a lot could happen, a lot of understanding can start developing. I know I went on a little bit of a rant, but I can't leave without saying something about Alma here. She's one of my favorite folks. She's 83 years old at that time, digging from Newark, and she was telling us amazing stories all the time. And yeah, and these are the types of folks that you would attract to this type of project.
Yes, when I made him go out and get canopies.
We saw Alma. All right, Sam, so do you want to, we'll just wrap up on the current and future initiatives. Do you want to give a little bit of an update on what's going on today?
Yeah, through our efforts in keeping this site in front of the DEP, and really saying to them, look, you purchased this in 2006 and you haven't done anything but maybe take the asbestos out. we kept pushing, and we have been blessed that the state found some money to do what they call the phase 1 or the stabilization. So what you're seeing there is a very current picture. This happened probably about within the past 2 weeks, actually. The front porch that was there recently wasn't original. So they're taking all the stuff that's not original from 1855, and they're taking it down to the base of the original. Like, I didn't realize that the siding on the original house was vertical versus horizontal, which is really interesting. It was probably something of the time period, but most of the time when you think of siding on a house, you think of it being horizontal. So it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to look once they strip off all the not all the stuff that wasn't original and take it down. So that's what's going on right now. It has been really great to see it happening.
Yeah, and then we're pursuing other grants, right, to do work, bring the still site to the digital age, right? Specifically, we want to create a 3D model of the historic office in Victorian House, bring in 3D scanners and 3D printers, do something similar to what Bernard Means is doing in the Virginia Commonwealth University to digitize our collection. So folks who are out of state can see the site, experience the site, see the artifacts, be able to engage with them online. And as you probably can assume, a lot of the Still family story is still in this area, right? So it's imperative we get an oral history project going and really develop that at the center and have folks record their stories and record the history and have it be there. Sam, you look surprised. This is something Carol and I were talking about.
Yeah. The one thing I will say that really shocked me with Marc's work was that, again, I'm a construction guy. My background's in construction. I'm an engineer. So when he said he was doing this archaeological project, I'm thinking artifacts. I'm thinking, wow, we're going to, like the cistern, like the septic tank that we found. We all thought it was this cistern. And, it was acting like it was like Geraldo opening up Al Capone's vault. Come to find out it was a septic tank. But at the end of the day, what I learned what Marc was trying to do, that his dissertation wasn't on the artifacts. Like he said, his dissertation was really on the community embracing the project, and that we all sat down while people were working together. People were telling their stories about where they came from and what this meant to them. And that's what his dissertation was about. I missed it early on, that it wasn't about the artifacts. It was the fact that he was bringing people together to learn from each other. And I just thought that was so very cool of him. So, I thank Marc for it, but I was totally floored and to be honest, I didn't figure it out until we went to New Orleans and he got an award and he started going through his dissertation and a presentation. I'm looking at him like, this thing wasn't about the artifacts? Like, but it wasn't about the artifacts. It was a mere fact that he brought people from different races, different ages to come to work together. And I think that's Marc's true trait, something that I hope that later on that he really develops and works on it and uses that, because that's his strength right there.
I appreciate that, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's easy when you're working with folks like Sam and Carol and Kenya and this whole Still Association, like the volunteer hours that go there and the work that's not recognized. And there's a lot of work behind the scenes. Like, Sam's at the center right now, and then you got to get up for work, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock,
Yeah,
just to get the Philly. And yeah, this is a long-term engagement. And I think that's the one thing I really want to stress is, like, if you're an archaeologist who wants to do a similar type of project, you got to be ready for the long haul. And basically, this is your career site, and that's okay. And you're going to work on these different projects. And my suggestion is, if you're worried about, like, how am I going to publish about things like that, like, don't worry about that. There's plenty to be published about when you do this type of work. There's plenty to be talked about. There's plenty of work to be done. I myself am working on designing a board game for the Dr. Still site. I want to get this into local school curriculums, and I see it as a way to bridge my interest in materiality theory, my interest in public engagement, and a way to get the Still story out there in an accessible way. And obviously, you know, once we can get funding and, you know, right now I'm an independent scholar, so I don't have the backing of an institution. It's a little bit harder to get, you know, grant monies or funding for archaeological excavations that way. But as a member of this historic Still Site Association committee, we have other means of doing that. So I'm looking and exploring that. Yeah, but that's if you all have any questions or you want to see what we're up to, just please follow us on our Facebook page. There's always updates there, almost daily.
Our website is drjamesstillcenter.org. And we're also on Instagram as Dr. James Still, and we're also on Facebook.